Stray Kids 5 Star is quite literally one of the biggest K-pop albums ever. It became the highest pre-ordered album for Stray Kids, JYP Entertainment, and the entire K-pop industry. Well-esteemed award academies like Billboard and iHeartRadio recognized 5 Star as the best K-pop album in all of 2023. 2 years later, and Stray Kids are still yet to top the 4.62 million albums 5 Star sold in just its first week. So what is it that made 5 Star so absurdly successful? I believe what it really comes down to is one thing: timing. The album was timed in a way that not only leveraged growing traction, but also a pent-up demand from existing fans. To understand their well-placed timing, we have to go back a few years to March 18th, 2022. Just a week before their 4th anniversary, Stray Kids released ODDINARY, another hugely successful album for the group. It not only became their first Billboard 200 entry, but also placed number 1 on the chart. Included on the album is Maniac, which, arguably, is their second most recognizable song ever. Stray Kids began their second world tour a little over a month later on April 30th, performing a total of 40 shows with about 776,000 attendees until April 2nd, 2023. Over that year, Stray Kids released 5 instances of new music. However, only one of them counted as an actual comeback. Maxident was successful too. Certainly not as recognizable as ODDINARY, but still a strong album that carried the group forward. What I'm especially trying to point out is that by the time 5 Star was announced, it had been almost 2 years since Stray Kids had last released a full-length album. They released No Easy on August 23rd, 2021, and while the singles and minis that followed kept fans engaged, there hadn't necessarily been a complete body of work since then. It's important that they do leave these gaps though, as it gives fans something to look forward to. The Maniac Tour helped soften the wait, but it also heightened the anticipation. As they were on tour, they couldn't create as much bonus content as they usually do. Most of it either had to be pre-recorded or left out altogether. Stays couldn't watch a ton of new videos of Stray Kids, meaning they got hungry for their return. So many people had just seen what Stray Kids are capable of on stage, and they were ready to see that same energy captured in a major release. That's why the timing of 5 Star's release on June 2nd worked so well. The tour had ended 2 months earlier, meaning the emotions from those performances were still fresh. At the same time, fans had been waiting nearly 2 years for another full-length album. That mix of recent excitement and long-term scarcity created the perfect conditions for pre-orders to skyrocket. Okay, now you might be thinking, well, didn't Karma come right after a huge tour? And you'd be right, but there were 2 major things that decided why 5 Star's timing was better than Karma's. For one, 5 Star released exactly 2 months after their Maniac tour ended. Karma released barely 3 weeks after Dominate ended. Funny enough, Stray Kids announced 5 Star 22 days after Maniac, but they outright released Karma 23 days after Dominate. Huge difference in timing. Stays had a bit more time to sit with kinda nothing before 5 Star, whereas with Karma, they were constantly getting things shoved down their throat, so much to a point that people felt overwhelmed and in turn lost excitement. The second thing I think of is how the albums were framed. 5 Star was positioned and marketed as being the album. Stray Kids put a huge emphasis on the tracks, the styling, and the aesthetics. The album felt huge, all from the moment they released the trailer. The trailer is goofy, but it's also grand. It perfectly encapsulates not only the album's vibe, but Stray Kids' style too. Now, I gotta come clean. I lied. I said it comes down to one thing, being timing, but really it's 2 things. Timing, of course, and presentation. I believe the way they presented 5 Star is part of why it sold so well. People know exactly what they were going to receive, and what they were presented with was enticing. Whenever Stray Kids release an album, they have a promotion cycle prior to it, consisting of concept images, track unveils, and a couple other things. They're usually pretty predictable, so it's important that they still make each one feel unique. This is where tweaking the content and how each one is presented is important. If we look at 5 Star's track unveils specifically, we'll see that the energy or hype builds up as songs are teased. They began with the simpler songs, like DLC and FNF, then shifted to the noisier sounds Stray Kids are known for with Get Lit and Top Line. It's important that they show both styles that you can find in the album. Show too much of the noise side and people might be disappointed when they hear the simpler songs. Show too much of the simpler songs and people might not buy the album quite as fast. But the way they presented this was by showing the lower, most likely less popular songs first, so that as the teasers progressed, people would feel more and more excitement. We can visibly see this excitement growing too. With the sole exception of the first unveil, each of the noisy unveils pulled in significantly more views in their first week, with Top Line noticeably having more views than Get Lit. It's worth mentioning that the fifth unveil, Beautiful, wasn't a hype song at all. It actually saw a huge drop in views because of it. However, it was important that the group didn't present 5 Star as a noisy album. Even though the album is prominently noise, they still chose to present the album beforehand with mostly simpler songs. I also believe Stray Kids presented the theme of 5 Star exceptionally well. Not only did it lean off of something beloved they had done before, but it also expanded on it in a way only Stray Kids could. As Pace Magazine wrote, name alone is an incredibly bold choice. No Easy is about how it isn't easy to do what they do and use that noisy sound, but 5 Star 10x's that idea, turning it to be about how the noise is literally what makes their music so addictive and successful. It was framed as a big deal, and the album showcased just that. People believed them about its grand nature because they constantly showed it with the promotion and the product. The album literally opens with a song called Hall of Fame. A lot of the K-pop industry is product and purchase focused, and not so much about presenting that product as an ensemble of artistic representation. There's so many albums being released that exist just to be sold. Albums that are written by several in-house producers with the sole goal of making something trendy and exciting. And while it can work for sales, it tends to hurt the group's interest. Where Stray Kids excel is through Sriracha. The actual members lead the production of the albums. And while I won't act like they have no interest in writing songs people will like, the main focus is absolutely writing music that fits their vision. We saw this artistic approach especially in their early years with I Am and Clay. 5 Star though is no exception. While certainly not every song on the album circles around this theme of top-class luxury, it's still very much so connected through an intentional vision. So many K-pop albums can only sell with the idea that they're new music from the group. And yeah, it totally works. But you absolutely cannot treat an album called 5 Star like that. They positioned it as a huge milestone of their career, one that would never be brushed away by their next new thing. I would even go so far as to argue that even after 2 years, Stray Kids haven't had an album that felt like the album. Since it wasn't just some product for the fans, stays became more attached to the album and practically grew a connection to it. This certainly can come as a byproduct of actually listening to the album, but a lot of it comes from earlier than that during the promotion phase. A little before they announced the album, and a little after they did, they ran a 4-part Skiz Code miniseries that showed off more of their goofier side. Obviously it kept stays excited as they waited for something, and later that album, but it also worked as a kind of presentation, showing that while the tour they just come off of was extremely professional and grand, they still had a goofier side to share. Those split sides came through exceptionally on 5 Star. Half of the presentation is the marketing and promotion. It's so important JYP Entertainment gets it right, as they really only have one shot with it. As I mentioned earlier, they tend to utilize a few different things in the pre-promotion phase. What's interesting about 5 Star's schedule is it was rather spaced out when they actually released those items. Usually there was 2 or 3 days between each new teaser. This let people not only enjoy what they tease, but also sit with it for a couple of days. It practically had time to marinate in their minds. They didn't immediately wash away what they just revealed with something new. However, as they entered the week of its release, they released something new each day. Honestly, all of it combined created a FOMO aspect where you wanted to keep up with everything they were unveiling. This totally played into how grand the album was presented to be. People felt like they had to get this album or else they'd miss out on the moment. It almost felt as though they were buying into a moment of history rather than just a CD. Another piece of 5 Star's presentation is its structure. Stray Kids formatted the album in a way that began grand and leaned into more of a meaningful side as the album progressed. It felt like you were actively traveling through something. So many of Stray Kids' hit albums open boldly with 3 powerful songs. You have the opener track, the title track, and then the runoff that expands upon the noise they've expressed. We'll call it the sacred order of Stray Kids albums. You have to have these songs in order for it to function properly. They almost always become the most iconic songs of the album, with each one having what it takes to actually be the title track itself. For example, No Easy opens with Cheese, leads into Thunderous, and then follows straight into Domino. ODDINARY 2 has it, Venom, then Maniac, and finally Charmer. Their most recent album, Karma, utilizes this as well. 5 Star, however, breaks that sacred order. Hall of Fame, S-Class, and Item play into it as usual, but it extends beyond the first 3 songs, continuing with Super Bowl and Top Line. They went astray from their usual sacred order in a way that built onto something more. Stray Kids chose to not only keep the energy high for the first 5 songs, but also put some of the best songs in front of you as soon as possible. 5 Star's 5 star tracks have received immense praise from Stay and new listeners for just how cohesive it is. They make sure they're not just stuffing you in your face though. DLC serves as a bit of a needed break from all that noise. Stray Kids might be known for their noisy style, but it certainly isn't the only type of song they write. They maintain that signature noise with Get Lit though, just before switching over to that simpler side with Collision, F&F, and Beautiful. All of this comes together almost like a journey. There's a bold entry point, maybe a bit of a quieter middle, and then an emotional finish. While it certainly does make for an enjoyable first listen, the biggest point is that it's easily replayable. It's one thing to take the best 12 songs you have and throw them on an album, since, well, people are probably gonna just put it in some random playlist and never care about the order they were in. If you're going for pure streams and track play, it can totally work. But if you're anything like Stray Kids are, you're probably gonna want to place them in an order that best suits the listening experience of the album. You could certainly still write great hits like S-Class or Top Line, but that doesn't mean something like Collision or F&F has no place on the album. They might not bring in as many plays, but they still contribute to the greater picture immensely. Okay, so what's my point? The thing is, albums don't sell because of one song. It can contribute to it, but you need to have a thoughtful piece of work that people enjoy as a whole. That's when people buy an album. It's one thing to have a hit song, but it's something completely different to have a hit album. Michael Jackson's Thriller is undoubtedly one of the biggest albums of all time, but not necessarily each song is a hit. The album has multiple huge songs, but not each one is designed to be a massive success. What made Thriller stand out so much is that even the songs that weren't necessarily topping charts still fed into a larger atmosphere. The record has a unifying tension between light and dark, like the accusations on Billie Jean or the supernatural spectacle of Thriller, balanced with warmer tracks like Human Nature and The Lady in My Life. This gave listeners something more than a handful of disconnected tracks. They practically received a world to feel a part of, and that's why people bought into the whole album. They weren't just trying to listen to their favorite song a couple of times, they were after the feeling that carried across the entire record. Am I saying that 5 Star has a comparable success to Thriller? Certainly not, but they both show how important it is to consider the greater picture of an album. So many albums in K-pop, and even just the music industry as a whole these days, disregard the fact that music is art and not just a way to get rich. It's because Stray Kids held on to that artistic approach that it could be so powerful. People received and related to something they weren't being given anymore. It ties back into their original goal with their sound. Just because it's not what the majority of the industry is doing, it doesn't mean they'll fall flat with it. They trusted that the right people would appreciate what they create, which is exactly what happened, leading to Stay growing so big. A good chunk of 5 Star's success is thanks to Stay. Stray Kids have a huge fan base of loving and loyal people that want to try and support them the best that they can. There's so many people out there that will buy several copies of their albums regardless of what it's like. I mean, I'm certainly no exception to it. Stray Kids were aiming for their 3rd album to debut at number 1 on the Billboard 200. Stays wanted to help them get there, leading to such a huge jump in US sales. Previously, ODDINARY sold 103,000 copies in its first week, Max didn't sold 117,000, and 5 Star jumped to 235,000 albums sold. A big piece of that came as a result of early pre-orders from Stays. Having a loyal fanbase can absolutely propel an album's success initially, and then get carried further thanks to its quality. This loyalty is built up way before the album is announced though. Kind of hard to order an album in support of a group if you aren't even connected to them. As I mentioned, the most loyal fans tend to buy more albums than just a casual listener. Certainly doesn't make you any less of a fan to purchase only one, but it's certainly a tactic to push total album sales. 5 Star had about 12 primary variants, version A, B, and C, limited version, and a member-specific digipack version. Now the average person probably didn't buy all 12 variants. At the most they probably got the 4 standard variants, and maybe a digipack of their bias. Point is, that's more copies per person than a lot of artists sell. A big selling point to the albums is what's inside them. They're packaged with additional inserts and benefits to purchasing them. Some standard inclusions are posters, photo books, stickers, and photo cards. It's incredibly important that the physical copies are appealing as well. For 5 Star, the album is designed to be beautiful. The members even mention that they're practically meant to be framed. Each version has a unique design that makes them catch your attention from the shelf.
I mean, just look at them. They're so detailed. They especially try to put a lot of emphasis on the limited one. That way people are more inclined to buying multiple copies. Totally fits with the framing they're using too.
5-star was specifically crafted to be owned, so it made sense that so many people wanted it. And with a combination of fan loyalty and deliberately collectible type of product, it leads to a huge spike of first week sales. Put those two things together and you have more people willing to buy more copies faster. You don't need every person on earth to do that. You just need enough people organized in the right way and at the right time. Which brings us to the Chinese market. China became a massive driver of bulk sales around this era. It was more than just casual fans buying one copy each. There were entire communities coordinating purchases at scale. A huge chunk of sales came from something called C-bars. They're basically highly structured communities that buy albums in bulk to get exactly the items each person wants from the albums. C-bars are excellent at turning individual intent into a collective action, but that multiplier has weakened recently. Platforms and regulators started cracking down on extreme fan activity. Fundraising rules, limits on mass buy behavior, platform enforcement, and other logistics for cross-border purchases made large, public, coordinated buys harder to run the way they once were. Fans certainly still buy albums in China, but it's nowhere near the organized mass purchasing as it was at its peak. So with C-bars disappearing, is it even possible for Stray Kids to ever pass the album records they set? Honestly, I'm not sure. When we compare their most recent full-length album to 5-star, we definitely notice a lot of things they chose to do differently, which likely hurt its sales overall. One of the first things people noticed was that the album only included 9 original songs, just 2 more than the usual 7 they have on mini albums. Like I mentioned earlier, the album released very close to the end of Stray Kids' Dominate tour, so people weren't really fiending for something new. How they promoted Karma was a little messy too. Instead of releasing things every few days and letting people discuss it, they unveiled something every single day, which, don't get me wrong, can work well, but most of that was just 2 or 3 images. Stays certainly like concept photos, but they much prefer song previews. Okay, here's another wild example. If you got a piece of garlic bread every day for a month, and then you got a piece of chocolate only a few days in that month, you're probably going to appreciate and look forward to that chocolate more, even though you're getting less of it. Whereas if you get a piece of garlic bread every 2 days and a piece of chocolate every 3 days, the chocolate still feels valuable, but you don't forget about the garlic bread. You're still excited to receive each piece of bread, even if you might like the chocolate better. Anyways. People tend to appreciate things in scarcity much more, and when there's scarcity, there's also excitement, and in turn, people are more keen to buying something. Stray Kids presented Karma as a variety album, which is totally fine on its own, but timing-wise, it just didn't work. This was coming right after the grandest, highest-selling K-pop tour ever. Stray Kids just expanded their monumental abilities on stage to over 2.2 million people. Logically, you'd want the album that follows so closely to the tour to finish that theme and prepare Stay for something new. Certainly nothing wrong with a variety album, but I totally believe it should have either been released later in the year or followed a grand finale album. Unfortunately, the physical variants weren't super interesting either.
They're kind of plain, just the Karma logo on top of them. Compared to pretty much all their albums, it definitely feels like a downgrade. Not the limited version though, this is pretty cool.
Karma was unexpected. I don't want it to seem like it didn't perform well. Over 3 million albums is still a ton to sell in your first week. 5-star just set the bar extremely high. Even if they never passed it again, it's a huge achievement to have. But is it realistically possible? Maybe. Just not yet. Unfortunately, I don't see Stray Kids being able to time an album properly in the time left before they begin military enlistments. So if they're ever going to surpass 5-star, it'll be sometime after all that is done. If they can market the album as an event, structure it with artistic background and prominently noise, lean into the elements of Stray Kids music that people already love, while also showing something entirely new, then I think they have a really good chance at breaking industry records again. It's a lot to demand and follow through on, but when hasn't the K-pop industry demanded more than seems possible? 5-star succeeded because everything was lined up in their favor. People were desperate for more, C-bars were peaking, and the promotion fed off of itself. Stray Kids showcased the album as something people needed to own, not just an object for cash. Stray Kids understood that in order to do something no one else had done yet, you have to be bold. If you want to see what Stray Kids comebacks are really like, you can click the video on screen. Thanks for watching. Bye 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 bye.